This afternoon, we are going to begin a discussion and all of government approach to implementing the Michigan Healthy Climate Plan. So we have a panel that highlights the climate work being done across the state in state government. The panel of government approach to implementing the plan is going to be moderated by our own director, Phil Roos, and I'll call him up now. Come on up. But I also, with his permission, would love to just do a short bio for the folks that are going to come up in addition to him. So, huh?
Is this my moment?
Yeah, well, yeah. You, give me a minute now. Oh, have a seat. Yeah. All right. Uncle Phil. First up is Director Tim Boring of MDARD, Michigan Department of Agricultural and Rural Development. So come on up. Dr. Tim Boring was appointed by Governor Whitmer on March 27, 2023. He previously served as the State Executive Director of the USDA Farm Service Agency. Then our Treasurer Eubanks, Rachael Eubanks, Michigan Department of the Treasury. She was appointed as Michigan's 47th State Treasurer by the Governor in January of 2019. Prior to that role, she structured more than $27 billion in bond financings for public entities, primarily the state of Michigan, State Building Authority, Michigan Finance Authority, and Michigan Strategic Fund. Next is CEO Quentin from Michigan Economic Development Corp. As the MED CEO and President and Chair of the Michigan Strategic Fund, Quentin Messer Jr. is charged with implementing and executing MEDC's core mission of business development and attraction, community development, providing access to capital, and enhancing Michigan's image and brand with a focus on building a strong and equitable economy for all Michiganders. Immediately prior to joining MEDC, Quentin was president and CEO of the New Orleans Business Alliance. And Dan Scripps, good friend, chair of the Michigan Public Service Commission. Dan was appointed by Governor Gretchen Whitmer to the Michigan Public Service Commission in February of 2019, and then named chair in July of the next year. As a commissioner, Mr. Scripps has been an active participant in multiple state energy advisory groups, including the Michigan Council on Climate Solutions, the Upper Peninsula Energy Task Force, the Michigan Dam Safety Task Force, and an interdepartmental work group on propane security. Chair Scripps is the immediate past president of the organization of, I always want to say MISO, it's probably MISO States and the Mid-America Regulatory Conference. So with that, sir, please.
Okay, thanks very much. Hello, there we go. Hey everybody, you came back. This is amazing. That was a good morning, wasn't it? We're going to do a little panel discussion here, and it's just a big honor for me to be with these folks who I admire so much, and it just so happens I've gotten to work with each of them a fair amount, probably more than they wish, but it's been a real pleasure. And the people in state government are amazing. I'm not sure that's the reputation in the outside world, but these guys are really big leaders and committed to the cause, and we're really trying to work together on a variety of issues. So I hope you enjoyed the morning where we talked. We had 4 great talks plus the Lieutenant Governor. We talked about the science of what's happening with climate change. We talked about health impacts due to climate change. We talked about economic and job opportunities that emerge from climate change and climate action. And then I don't think I'm alone in talking about in just mentioning how powerful the environmental justice panel was. A lot of really thought-provoking questions for all of us. So now we're going to switch gears a little bit, and we're going to talk about government's role in this. And for those who listened to my opening talk and are still here, thank you. But one of the things that I talked about there was that we need an all-of-everything approach. Every tool in the arsenal within government, every part of government working together and doing things on their own, and all of society. we need that as well. People of all walks of life taking action here. So what I'd like to do is to just talk to each of my colleagues here, and I'm going to really commit a big state of government sin, and I'm not going to call them director or CEO or chair, and we'll see how they feel about that, you know. It's kind of nice having that level of respect, but it's all gone here for this session. That way it'll feel like we're just on a couch talking to each other here. I think you guys are all pretty familiar with the goals of the climate plan, 52% emission reductions by 2030, carbon neutrality by 2050, and a whole lot of other things. You should know that we have a climate council, which has been referred to before, that all of these folks serve on it. And that state of government presence is really important to success so that we can have that all-of-government approach. I've got a half dozen questions. We'll see how many we get through here. But what I want to start with is just to ask each of the folks on this stage, and you don't have to hear about EGLE. You're going to hear a lot about EGLE and the rest of the conference. But I just would be really interested in some of the goals of the plan that specifically relate to each of your departments. And Dr. Director Tim, that's the last time I'll call you that, but Tim Boring, who's been a great partner at Department of Agriculture. We work together on a lot of things, and I think we're finding a lot of points of intersection on climate. Could you speak a little bit to what's happening in climate, parts of the plan that you're working on, and that sort of thing?
Well, certainly, and thank you, Phil. No, I think the opportunity for us in agriculture is to integrate climate work fundamentally into everything that we do within agriculture. And I mean, in the short term, there's some specific actions that agriculture is already targeting and working on to be a greater part of the climate solution, right? Of changing a lot of how land use is managed so that we're storing carbon in a more direct way, we're managing water flows better, we're building resiliency in food systems, so we've got some predictability, economically, environmentally, socially around agricultural systems in a changing climate here. But within the context of state government then, I think this becomes such an opportunity to invest in what makes Michigan special and to be integrating that work in a really fundamental way. This is more than just about changing land use patterns of what we're specifically doing with cropping systems, but how we're building communities. If you want to drive economies in Michigan, you do that through agriculture. It's absolutely true in rural areas. It's true in a lot of urban areas as well when you start to encompass the scope of food processing and just the distribution of our systems here. So the idea here that we're building and investing thoughtful, purposeful ways around how we're developing climate solutions through all of agriculture. It's how we're incentivizing and building food systems and businesses, how we're responding to challenges in associated ways of beyond just managing weather expectations. It's about funding and working with animal systems in different ways. What we're really aiming to do within the context of what we're doing in agriculture is provide greater opportunities for the folks that are specifically working in agriculture on a daily basis, building resiliency in systems, building diversity. But translating that all the way through so that we're tone setting this as an expectation for all of Michigan around what we can be doing within climate adaptation.
That's great. Thank you. It's such a breath of fresh air to have the head of the agriculture department being a true climate champion and really centering all the work that you're doing around that. I think Keith mentioned Tim is a soil scientist. He owns a 5th-generation farm where he does regenerative agriculture, and it's clearly in your blood, and we appreciate that. Okay, Treasurer Eubanks, Rachael, you know, if you were just asking people, top of mind, what would be the departments that spend the most time on climate change? I'm just guessing Treasury might not come up as often, but I know that's not true.
Yeah.
Can you share how your linkage between what you're doing and the My Healthy Climate Plan, please?
Phil, that's fair. I think I'm kind of known as the tax lady, but there's so much more here. And when I was walking down for the session with Chairman Scripps here, he was joking that, like, you should just use your title Commissioner Emeritus. And I was like, actually, that's a good idea. It's been a number of years. So I was on the Public Service Commission from 2016 to 2019, and it was a tremendously exciting time as we were gearing up to plan for this transition, to prepare for this transition in our energy supplies. But, with my background in finance, of course, seeing all of these things happen and this excitement coming down the road, you see the real impact that it's going to mean on communities statewide who have housed, existing fossil fuel facilities, who have been absolutely critical to serving our infrastructure in our state for decades and generations, and knowing how important those facilities were to those communities. So, as I came into this role, I was just delighted that we could pull together an effort to say, okay, as we're going forward towards this tremendously exciting time, how are we making sure we're not leaving communities behind? Oftentimes these facilities are sited in places where it may be their biggest tax base by quite some margin. And of course, tax bases are how, communities pay for basic services. Everything from, utilities, local utilities, so like water utilities, roads, schools, that type of thing. So a very, very important piece of the fabric of those communities in addition to just their identity. And thinking about, okay, well, if we know these things are coming, and the 2016 energy law provided us with some tools from resource adequacy plans that the commission was now beginning to gain greater insight into, all right, now we know we've got 10 years, we know we've got 15 years, we know we have 5 years or 3 years to say, how are we going to transition these communities, diversify their economic base, and ensure that they're going to continue to thrive well after these facilities have left their area. So as part of that 2020 executive directive that we're all talking about here, Treasury was tasked with the ETIP plan, or the Energy Transition Impact Plan, to pull together multidisciplinary teams. And I love this approach because this really gets filled to your point of what you're saying. How are we working across state government to provide the greatest amount of resources to these communities who, one, need it, and two, smaller communities are likely not to have the technical capabilities just because of bandwidth and how much smaller communities governments have to attend to, in addressing these transitions coming down the pike. So taking this lead on this, we had a few real test cases that we were able to work through very quickly. First was, of course, the anticipated closure of the Palisades nuclear plant in Southwest Michigan. And then there were some additional coal-fired power plants on the downriver or east, southeast part of Michigan that we were able to create blueprints around. And thank you to Consumers Energy and DTE, who provided critical resources for us to do studies, as well as our federal partners as well, who provided additional dollars to create blueprints to say, okay, if we know this is coming, how are we preparing today for the transition that may be happening many years down the road? And bringing together economic development, bringing together housing, bringing together so many pieces so we can think better about how we can support these communities going forward. So, we're well underway in this work. I'm really excited about the blueprints that we have, and I think we can continue to serve communities well as we're pushing forward as a state on this critically important issue.
Thank you, Rachel. And Quentin, good to see you. We've been spending a lot of time together lately.
A lot of time, probably more time than you want and can stand.
So Quentin, as the person really in charge of driving economic growth and jobs in the state, play a key role in that. A lot of people say, what does that have to do with climate? I know we have certain industries that play a role in the energy transition and so forth. But I think historically, there's been a perception that business and environment are at odds with one another. And we're trying to prove the world wrong on that, that we can have environmental protection and getting rid of, mitigating climate impacts at the same time that we can have economic prosperity. Can you speak to that a little bit and just how your department is approaching that?
Yeah, thank you, Phil. I think there are really three things to keep in mind. The title of the panel is the all-in-government approach. And fundamentally, Michigan's economic development strategy is Make It in Michigan, focus on people, places, and projects. We have to attract and develop people. We have to revitalize and cultivate places. And we have to compete for and win projects. And Phil, I think you said it best, is that we are proving to the world the power of and. You can responsibly protect the environment, create that unique place that we all love that's attractive for companies and entrepreneurs as they think about where they can have profitable growth. But you also can have profitable growth. And what we're seeing is we have to be able to respond to federal industrial policy that has made it in the best interest of states that can respond to this existential threat. I mean, you can have all the economic development you want, but if you are melting and don't have water, it is immaterial. And so fundamentally, we know the best businesses are those that solve challenges and respond to human needs. And so we want to make sure that we do that. I am grateful to be on stage with these colleagues. Many of them have answered texts or emails all times, day or night from me, because we're in a moment where I think companies really are looking to do three things. One, they have to have profitable growth, but they also understand if they're going to attract and retain people, they have to provide people with a sense of belonging. And increasingly, people want to see companies be climate responsible. And the last thing is, we really do have here in Michigan our ability to balance the imperative of protecting the climate as well as having a vibrant economy, because there are certain parts of this nation that will be uninhabitable. And right now we're seeing you cannot get insurance in certain places. And that creates real economic opportunity for us.
Great. Thanks, Quentin. And Dan, I don't know where to start. Dan, since I met him, 10 or 15 years ago, he's been a climate champion that whole time. Pretty instrumental in the development of the My Healthy Climate Plan. Runs the agency that actually is involved in a lot of the power regulation that's so central to this, and was the lead agency in passing all that clean energy legislation that we talked about last fall. So I don't think you're going to be short of connections between the My Healthy Climate Plan and the work you do in the agency. But could you share a little bit at a high level about that?
Yeah, thanks, Phil. I guess I'd break it up into maybe the structure of the My Healthy Climate Plan, and that's what do we need to do between now and 2030 to reduce emissions by 50%, and then what do we need to do in the next 20 years to get the other 50% out of the system. And the starting point, I think, from now to 2030, really you look at the two sectors that emit the most, and it's the power sector and it's transportation. And just to be clear, the Public Service Commission is not, or traditionally has not been, a climate agency. We're economic regulators largely. We've been given some additional authority recently by the legislature, and we're excited about that. But even within that sort of economic regulatory approach, where it's sort of looking at rates and tariffs, there's a huge role to play in effectively and responsibly managing that transition in the power sector. And you've seen that, as Rachael was talking about, going back, well beyond the beginnings of this administration, in the first iteration of the utility integrated resource plans, in the renewable energy plans, and meeting the first requirement to get 10% and then 15% cost-effectively renewable energy on the system, deploying enough energy efficiency that we've avoided the need to build 2 new billion-dollar gas plants as a result of energy efficiency savings, and done at a third to a quarter of the price of what those have been with zero emissions. And so that, I think, is the way that we can use our traditional statutory mandates to make sure that we're promoting this path. And then on transportation, it's the same thing. What does the grid need to do to be ready for 2 million electric vehicles on our roads by 2030? And overseeing the utilities investments, understanding the roles that different players, whether it's utilities or third parties, play in this landscape, but making sure that the infrastructure isn't the bottleneck to getting to those goals. And then looking beyond 2030, it's things, and they were called out in the My Healthy Climate Plan. It's what is the future of heat? How do we decarbonize home heating? What are our strategies, probably sector by sector within the industrial space, looking at everything from cement to auto manufacturing to plastics and the sort of range of things that are likely going to be sector specific. They may not be policy driven, but to the extent those are electrified, or the inputs that are currently served by traditional methane can be decarbonized with renewable natural gas or other fuels, the Commission's going to have a role in that. And so I think, it's one of these things where there's a lot on our plate, but we've got a fantastic team. And I will say, sort of over the last several iterations of commissioners, and certainly the staff that do the real work, that it's been inspiring to see just how much progress we've made over the last 5 to 10 years. And it gives me confidence that we're up to the task as we look, another, 6 years out to 2030, and then 20 years beyond that.
Thanks a lot, Dan. I think we get an appreciation of the complexity of the challenge and the role that you have, especially with this extended authority to regulate power generation. It's pretty breathtaking. I want to shift gears and talk about, we'll just do sort of lightning round on this, but talk about successes within departments or across departments, and also we'll come back to challenges later. So let's just, everybody, if you have one or two couple, greatest hits, things you're really proud of, what would that be? Rachel, do you mind starting?
Sure. I mean, I kind of touched on them in my introductory comments, which was, first is the plan in Southwest Michigan related to the Palisades power plant closure. So, of course, we've had some great news, some foreshadowing around, this, the existing company that's looking to restart that facility, which would be a historic restart, as that's never happened with a nuclear facility. But it's still important for these communities to diversify their economies in ways where they don't have that same level of concentration on their revenue base. So we did work with the University of Michigan. We worked with several other stakeholders in the area, local chambers of commerce and so forth, to stand up this plan to pull it together on that front to create that blueprint. On the east side of the state, the downriver communities, they actually set up their own conference, which I think is a tremendous success on the local level, where they're really driving that. We know that the best solutions are going to come from the grassroots area, from the local units of government, and instead of us. But we can provide technical support and resources when necessary, so they can pull all of those pieces of the plan together. So I say those are really two of the areas that we've seen the most success in trying to think of this just transition from a local government financial health perspective.
Great, thank you. Quentin?
I always like to end with a high note, so I'll start with opportunities for us to get better. Is that I think that we always have the responsibility of making it easier for you and your colleagues at EGLE or Director Boring at Department of Ag, or the Treasurer at Treasury, or Chair at Scripps, to make it easier to give you more time to understand, what we need from businesses in order to get incumbent Michigan businesses to continue to grow and expand here, to attract new businesses, to ensure that we have the type of regulatory environment that inspires entrepreneurs. We need to make sure that we express to you what must be true, so you have time to respond and be part of the solution process. I think we're getting better in that. And on the things I'm most proud of are the fact that we collectively have been able to win some of the largest projects that have been announced in clean tech. At Select USA last year, which is really all about foreign direct investment, the largest announced project was a Nel Hydrogen $400+ million electrolyzer project. That required all of us collectively to work together. And I think that we are beginning, and I don't want to get ahead of our skis, but we are more aggressively getting sophisticated and understanding the multiple verticals within clean tech. Our desire to protect our economy, protect our environment, is creating entrepreneurial opportunity to which companies are responding. And they are saying, probably in a disproportionate way, which is a great thing for us, that Michigan is a place in which they can do that. So we look forward to having future announcements of companies opening great paying jobs that are responsible to the economy, to the environment.
What's been your approach to developing that expertise across the different parts of clean tech? Because that is kind of overwhelming with the pace of technology change and everything.
I think there are a couple of things. Once, it takes a team approach. So we're working, in addition to the agencies represented here, we are working with Director Corbin and Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity as they are pursuing things that can draw down more federal dollars. We're getting smarter with retaining consultants who have unique expertise and connectivity, not only domestically but internationally. And also, the Treasurer mentioned taking advantage of the fact that we have really smart people in higher ed, in two-year colleges, who are thinking constantly about this and making sure that we're engaging with the University of Michigan, Michigan State, Michigan Tech, Wayne State, and the other universities here to make sure that we are leveraging their connectivity industry to make it easier. And I think the last thing is, one of the first things Governor Whitmer did when she became governor was create the nation's first chief mobility officer. So understanding that the Office of Future Mobility and Electrification and the current inhabitant is Justine Johnson, making sure that we're not only looking at electrification as an alternative to the internal combustion engine, but also looking at hydrogen and making sure that we have the infrastructure to support this evolution.
Super. That's great. Dan, what's your greatest hit list look like?
So there's a bunch. I would point to the results from the integrated resource plans. I mean, we have announced closure dates for every single coal plant in the state of Michigan, which, if you went back to 2015, would be unthinkable. And all of them have been accelerated beyond the initial anticipated closure date. That's a significant shift in Michigan's energy resource mix, and we've done it, I think, responsibly, affordably, identifying the mix of both demand-side resources like energy efficiency and renewables and other things that can come in behind that in a way that keeps the lights on and sort of makes sure that energy remains affordable. The other piece I would point to, again, on energy efficiency, because it's so important, but it also, when you start thinking about how it affects different people, making sure that we're focusing on the needs of low-income customers in a very real way. And we've had a staff-led group, the Low Income Energy Waste Reduction Collaborative, that goes back 5 or 7 years. It's a national model. And our energy waste reduction cases are often done in settlement. The settlements go further, candidly, than I think we could go as the commission if we were just ruling on them. And they've become a national model that's groundbreaking in terms of how we're thinking about the customer and developing programs that meet their needs and their specific economic circumstances. It's one of the reasons that we're one of the top 3 states in the country, according to the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, in terms of our utility energy efficiency plans. If I was going to name one challenge, it's that Quentin's really good at his job. And so for a long time, we've been sort of managing along with sort of like, oh, we can replace and add and incrementally. And now we're seeing all of these businesses that Quentin is convinced to locate in Michigan, and data center load growth and everything else. It's a whole new world. Eventually, I think, the story with load growth over the last 100 years has been that a rising tide lifts all boats. But there are challenges to be worked through in the interim. So it's a good problem to have, but it's forcing us to sharpen our pencils.
And the interesting aspect of that is that a number of these companies are demanding renewables.
Absolutely. Yep.
And that's a big challenge, even if companies want to do the right thing and support what we're doing. How do we ramp up quickly enough to do that? Tim, anything you feel particularly proud of? Or I'll give you another category.
I'm good on this one.
Do the pride thing, and then I'll...
Pride thing. Well, I'd point to our work in regenerative agriculture at the department. And so that's something different for departments of ag anywhere in the country to be investing so specifically in as a pathway to success. So for those that might not live this every day, what's regenerative agriculture, right? More than a change of practice, it's a change in management approach on farms, right? It's guided by principles driven to outcomes. And that outcome piece is really essential here. It's, in practice, in a lot of ways, it looks like investing in soil quality. It's boosting capacity in your ground, but it's purposeful management towards a more end goal around more biological capacity and less resilient, less dependency on outside inputs and a variety of detrimental practices to farms and systems today. It's something that I've been drawn to personally before my work here. This is a path on our family farm to greater long-term generational profitability and resiliency and capacity. We've owned land in our family for a long time on our farm. It makes sense to invest in that for a long-term return here. So there's pathways here then on a farm level for increased profitability, short and long term. But you talk about those outcomes in different ways, and there's a real play on this of why all of us in this room should be committed to outcomes that can be achieved through management like this. So if you're investing in soil and you're building carbon and you're mitigating the effects from extreme weather, you're reducing the need for fertilizer inputs in different ways, you're building resiliency, you're building valuing diversity on systems. Now we're a contributor in different ways to the issues that we have here as a state of water quality, the fragility of agricultural systems that are increasingly more narrow and profitability focused without a lot of concern around resiliency. It's a solution to climate change. There's a limitation to how much carbon you can boost on a per acre basis of soil. But we got a lot of acres of soil here in Michigan and across the nation that can be a real driver of contributing in a positive way to climate change. So that focus away from practice-based on a government approach to more outcome-based and being more forward-charging about what the outcomes we might want and we might value as a tone setter too. This is work that lives in our environmental bureau in the department, is traditionally thought of around as conservation work, but we're purposefully talking about the ramifications of this more broadly too, that if you have a market and a system that can diversify your production, then we're bringing in higher value crops. We're investing in what makes Michigan special in the first place, of our ability to grow a lot of different things and do it in a high value way that creates a lot of jobs and a lot of places for people to intersect and be a part of this. We're creating agricultural systems that are more aligned with our culture and social values. And so it's giving people a reason to be invested in Michigan and why it matters to be a part of this state. So it's a tone setter in a different way for us of it's empowering our own staff, it's empowering agriculture to be a more definitive contributor to this important work in a way that they haven't been so in the past. Bringing people along with this and having people feel seen in this, having people see immediate wins to this is really important. So I'm eager to continue to invest in that space to continue to make agriculture a larger part of these rooms and these solutions.
Yeah, Rachael.
Yeah, great response. And not a direct response to you, Dr. Boring, but the conversation that was just held between, Chairman and Quentin over here about, the way that we're reacting to new industry and bringing in new employment in Michigan, and thinking about the wins for your question, Phil, which is, I think a tremendous win for Michigan is our energy regulatory structure. We are able to value attributes in the system the way that a competitive, regulatory structure is not able to. And I think, that's allowed these policy initiatives, the Renewable Portfolio Standard that Chairman Scripps talked about, and as well as thinking creatively around how we can allocate resources and supporting the economic development model, which is, not something that every state has the ability to do, including our nearest neighbors. So, I just want to give incredible kudos to the Public Service Commission and working with the MEDC and thinking through how can we use those tools to our benefit to be competitive as a state.
I'd love to take that compliment, but it really belongs to the legislature.
Yeah.
I think they have put together over time and in different sort of iterations of reform a structure that works. And so we just got to make sure we don't mess it up.
That's right, yeah.
Thank you for punctuating that. That's an important point. I want to do something different here before we get to challenges, is just to ask for examples, if anybody has any, of sort of under the radar, things that you haven't heard of, but that maybe they haven't resulted in big carbon emission reductions or anything yet, but you're pretty encouraged by that. It's something happened behind the scenes. I'll give an example within EGLE. We have a program called the Climate Liaisons, where we have representatives from every single department and office, and they work with the Office of Climate and Energy to do things within every part of EGLE that will really institutionalize climate action going forward, that everything we do, and whether it's water resources or air quality, has a climate element to it. And I was just saying to Corey Connolly a couple days ago, we got two big things to accomplish in climate in EGLE. One is get the plan implemented. Two is embed it so it's there forever. So it's not going to be easy to extract. It'll have enough momentum that nobody can get in the way, because that's what we need. We can't afford to be interrupted. Anybody have an example of something like that you'd like to share?
I guess I'll share, and I think it builds upon everyone's comments, is that MEDC, along with Leo and the agencies represented here, we're really looking to launch industrial decarbonization innovation. I think the thing that we have more than I think we fully appreciate is that we have incredible universities, public and private, that are committed to the public good and to taking research and deploying it in a way that moves forward humankind. And I think that you're going to see much more about, as we evolve and thinking about clean tech, it's not going to just be in the mobility space, land, air, and sea, but also about industrial decarbonization. How do we heat homes? Things of that nature. And I think that's going to be triggered by the research and our ability to commercialize some of the cutting edge research that is going on inside the state. So that's one thing about which I'm excited that you may not be headlines today, but will be headlines 2 to 3 years down the road.
Yeah, that's a good one. Anybody else? Anything under the radar, Dan?
Yeah, so in addition to the work that we do at the Public Service Commission, we also, by virtue of participating in 2 regional markets, grid operators, MISO and PJM, have a role as states in the sort of governance structures of those and what they're up to. And I'll say that these are well under the radar. So Keith was talking about it when he introduced me. I'll tell you, when I started, I'm not sure that I could spell PJM. But the work they do is incredibly important. And so MISO, for example, recently approved and is in the process of beginning to roll out a $10.3 billion portfolio of transmission projects across its footprint. It's the largest ever footprint, and now they're working on Tranche 2, as they call it, which is going to be twice that. And these, in addition to unlocking just vast amounts of renewable energy deployment, being able to bring the energy from where it's being generated into the load centers like Detroit and Flint and Grand Rapids, it's a huge driver of the ability to deploy renewables, but it's also absolutely central to keeping the lights on through the transition. And we've seen that in Winter Storm Elliott and Uri. If you've got it, you are so grateful, and if you don't, your lights aren't on. And so from both a reliability and resilience standpoint, but also from a decarbonization standpoint, that work is well under the radar, but it's as important as anything that we're doing.
Tim, did you add?
Well, and I could share one that's under the radar only because largely it's so new. So our department was recently a recipient of one of the Climate Corps volunteer grants with the federal government, specifically working to build up capacity for volunteers to build up regenerative ag demonstration farms in partnership with Veterans Affairs, located just outside of town here, of really conceptualizing how regenerative agriculture and some of these outcomes we care about can be a pathway to veterans engaging in agriculture and being a part of some of these solutions. So, I mean, to your point, Quentin, it's not about just this, right? It's not about just what we can do in agriculture. It's how can we be working cross-agency with veterans, for instance, about providing some opportunities there, achieving some shared outcomes within this broad umbrella of outcomes we all care about.
That's great. Rachael, if you don't mind, I'd like to move on to another topic,
Sure.
and one that I've heard you be super articulate about, and that is, I guess, the topic of this whole discussion, which is interagency and intra-agency cooperation. Could you riff on that a little bit, just why it's important and what are the keys to success? Because it's an art and a science to getting that right.
I mean, I think you'll find after serving in 2 separate, completely separate departments in state government, I mean, you see all this tremendous expertise in one area, and then you uncover all of these interesting novel issues. And then, you're limited as far as your authorizing legislation or whatever your regulatory powers are in terms of what you can actually do about those things that you know. And so then, but there's often other entities in state government that have the ability to do the things that you're worried about, but maybe there's not necessarily the communication avenues available or the integration necessary to actually take that information and do something with it. And one thing I really appreciate about, this administration and this governor's initiatives is they have thought very carefully through about how to interweave all these pieces to ensure you're not just getting this great piece of information and it's getting dropped or not acted upon because you don't have the powers that you need to do something about it. I think of that really 2 big things. I mean, one's going back to the Energy Transition Impact Project. Knowing a power plant is closing, knowing it's going to have huge impacts on that community, but not having anything to do about it. And historically, it's stopping there. And now saying, okay, hey, we have this process where now we can actually refer that, to the Department of Treasury, make sure that they have the integrated resource plans, that they have this on their radar screen. We take that, we do an analysis about what is the impact to the tax base. It could be 30, 40, 50% of that community's tax base. So then we can raise the alarm to say, hey, if we're going to try to avoid a financial crisis for this community, we need to plan now for the future and how we're going to do that. And that's when we'll pass the ball along to the MEDCs, the MSHDAs, the other agencies of the world to figure out how do we get new jobs? How do we cross-train employees with LEO? how do we think about the housing that's available in these communities, and is it the right, all of those the right things, in addition to retraining our workers to, oftentimes the new electric investments are not in the same community where that exists. So that's a big one. I also think about this as far as the, transition in vehicles that we've been talking about a little bit here, and Quentin touched on that. Going from, the internal combustion engine to the electric vehicle has real impacts on our gas tax structure, which is, of course, how we fund our roads. So that used to be, an area where at the Public Service Commission, you're looking to incentivize charging stations and building the correct, transmission and grid structures that can support these, very peaky fast chargers and all of those type of things. But then you go to say, okay, well, if we're incentivizing that, but we don't have the right revenue coming in for the roads to drive on, like, are we really serving ourselves well? So now there's another task force where you're actually passing that along. Okay, so now that's coming to, Treasury and to MDOT and for others of us to think about what are those, fundamental structures that we have that may need to be revisited or studied to say how can we support the state as a whole through these critically important transitions and structures. So I just really commend, this government for figuring out how to weave all these pieces together and having less of that information dropping along the way.
Yeah, good. Other thoughts on that? Keys to interagency and intra-agency cooperation?
Some of this intra-agency, right? We've recently reorganized our entire department. And one of the primary goals around this was to break down some of these silos and these cross-communication pathways. A benefit of this is elevating up some leaders in important ways and having folks that have some time to be thinking about strategic development, understanding of how we weave these kind of pieces together in ways that we don't always have time to do. If you're so mired in the daily work that we're not kind of picking our heads up and looking at the horizon and understanding of how these pieces need to be coming together, of working just within our own agency about what solutions can look like from one division to the next, one bureau to the next, how we're integrating some of our environment and sustainability work with our ag development work. And so that sounds like small things, right, and moving some pieces around, but for us it is a tone-setting shift of we're moving out of silos. We've got to be talking more to each other. We've got to be leveraging and pulling in resources in different ways because we do have a lot of deep-seated expertise in so many ways in the department, but we don't do a good enough job sometimes of leveraging that and taking those lessons learned in specific areas and specific programs and integrating that through the whole thing.
And yeah, Phil, if I could, I want to talk about two places where the MPSC interacts with EGLE. One is on the advisory opinions that EGLE files in our integrated resource planning cases or the utility integrated resource planning cases. And, as in the first round, it was sort of like, are they compliant with existing laws? And it's sort of like check the box. Yep. And it was and then I think, the governor sort of put out an executive directive saying, let's go further than that. Let's think about public health. Let's think about environmental justice. Let's think about equity. And the legislature then reinforced that and codified that in the bills that were passed. And I think that's has the potential to be transformative, and working with EGLE around what that is in making sure that we then, as we're deciding these, have a strong evidentiary record to consider how the utility plans or the alternatives to elements of the utility plans play on these really important pieces that too often are lost in our proceedings, candidly, I think is really important. So that partnership between EGLE and the MPSC in that I think is really important. And then when you were introducing me, you talked about the role that I played in the legislation last year. And I certainly was honored to do that, but I will tell you that we would still be in the basement of the Capitol someplace if it wasn't for Kara Cook. And so that partnership between our legislative team and your legislative team in moving forward a really ambitious but also pragmatic set of policies that I think are workable, but ultimately are absolutely consistent with what was in the My Healthy Climate Plan and lay out the statutory roadmap for how we get from here to there, I think is really important.
Yeah, Kara is a force of nature. Where are you, Kara? Are you in the room?
Oh, over there.
All right, stand up. So much of what we're talking about here today, Kara's played a central role in. We appreciate you. Quentin, anything to add? I mean, your agency is all about intergovernmental. You don't survive without that, right?
No, I mean, you're absolutely right. I think the key is to always, and I think you see it exhibited here, it's just helping people understand the power of and rather than or. And I think it's from the governor, the lieutenant governor, the legislature, as as the chair pointed out, but really that, and making sure that we have done our part with companies to help them understand what must be true in order for them to make sure that they're part of maintaining a healthy climate here in Michigan, not only for business, but also for us to breathe and grow and enjoy the water and recreate and all those things. And we really are on the precipice of becoming a place where you can have it all if you understand the context and try to make sure that you hold true to some values that I think allow for productive commerce, but also a productive environment for all of us to be healthy.
That's great. We would be remiss if we didn't talk about the intersection between climate change and climate mitigation and environmental justice. Those issues are deeply intertwined. Let's talk for a minute just about how each of your departments are integrating equity and justice into the work you're doing around climate.
For us, in a lot of ways, it's who has access to be contributors in a piece of this agricultural system. It's work that we're doing within urban ag. It's a component of our regenerative ag work. It's work that we're looking to build out with a farm-to-family budget proposal that the governor's put forth of having some purposeful investment of who has pathways to be engaged in agriculture for the benefit for our broader system, for the benefit of their own generational wealth, for the benefit of their communities, making sure that we've got pathways that becomes accessible to be into this. We're creating real substantive opportunities. We're doing so in ways that generate outcomes that we all care about, but just increasing opportunities, being mindful of our own limitations of how we've gone about doing things that haven't resulted in the outcomes we need, but really putting a specific focus on, like this is a piece of, when we talk about from a department level of caring about diversity and resiliency, sure, it's a piece of what it means for the diverse cropping systems we have here in the state, for fruits and vegetables, but the diversity, the true value of the diversity is the diversity of who's a piece of this agricultural system.
Great. Rachel?
Yeah, I mean, not exactly on this point, but I will just say, I mean, certainly a lot of the investments and the efforts that take place in the state are and can be incentivized through our tax code. So, you can incentivize through tax breaks, or you can discourage behaviors by increasing taxes. And so, I mean, oftentimes those do work their way through the legislative process and end up, kind of on our desks in Treasury. And one area I just wanted to, kind of touch on was the recent solar PILT, or payment in lieu of tax effort that we, kind of spearheaded, which was trying to figure out, as we're looking to site, large utility scale solar arrays and related infrastructure in local units of government, how do we balance really two incredibly important pieces? One is incentivizing this infrastructure that we know we need to have, but also not leaving people behind, because this is kind of the theme here from our perspective in Treasury, and saying how are these local units of government fairly compensated for their land and the services that they're provided in supporting these infrastructure and technologies. And so, I mean, we tried to handle this process very differently than we've done with like the wind, a very similar wind process, and saying, okay, like let's get a lot of stakeholder-driven input on the front end and think about areas that we should be considering from the State Tax Commission perspective, which is in Treasury, and determining the fair prices that local units of government should be compensated for, and allowing these facilities in their jurisdictions. And I think it really resulted in, it took a number of years. We had lots and lots of stakeholders, a variety of stakeholders across the board, but I think the result is something that does help us, ensure that we're not, unfairly impacting certain areas of the state who are taking on some of these critically important infrastructure, and again, still providing the incentives necessary to ensure that we're seeing the investments we need.
That's great. Thank you. Quentin?
Sure. I mean, I think the first thing is to acknowledge that there's work that remains to be done. But I think having that intentional understanding of that. So just a couple of things. I think one, over the past couple of years, we have a full-time DEI officer. So it's not something that's ancillary, but it's a core part of how we approach executing the Make It in Michigan economic development strategy focused on people, places, and projects. I think the other thing is making sure that we are creating pathways for environmentally justice-infused entrepreneurship opportunities to emerge, and making sure that we are providing connectivity to those entrepreneurs. I just think of a company, Just Air, that's out in southeast Michigan, making sure that you're creating pathways and access to growth stage capital, as well as connectivity to large buyers who could take advantage of the goods and services provided. And I think final thing is to try to make the playbook of how do you engage with MEDC. Unlike some of the larger state agencies, we don't have large procurement programs, but what we do have is making sure that people have access and understand the what must be true in order to either secure contracts from MEDC or to get funding support from the Michigan Strategic Fund.
Great. Dan?
Yeah, I would agree. Ours is an acknowledgement of how much needs to be done and that it's a work in progress, but that we have taken, I think, important steps. When DTE ultimately was retiring the River Rouge plant, we required, I think even before ETIP was established, that they develop a just transition plan to go with it. I think it's the first time we had done it, but it was an important piece of saying, how do we make sure that communities, the workers, are taken care of, and we're thinking about sort of what comes next. But also, to Quentin's point, I think in the wake of the murder of George Floyd and so many others, we had a staff-led group that really tried to tackle what this means for the Commission, both as an employer and an organization where people go to work and dedicate their careers, but also as the overseer of infrastructure that too often bears the same scars of systemic discrimination that we see across society overall in terms of where plants are located and where the infrastructure gets investment and where it doesn't. And sort of embedding that into the work in rate cases, in siting decisions, in integrated resource plans, and then the additional requirements that have been brought to us by the legislature as part of last year's laws, that we think about procedural justice and how do we make sure that those who are too often left out of the process because of barriers to entry, you've got to have a lawyer, you've got to have expert witnesses, and how do we start to think about addressing those? And so there's a lot of work to be done here, but I think we've started taking those steps, and in an intentional way that acknowledges we've got work to do, but we're committed to doing it.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, last question. You know, this My Healthy Climate Conference seems to be an annual event. We're going to come back next year. They're going to ask us to be on a panel, and they're going to say, what did you do in the last year? What did you get done? And I would just love everybody just to think of one or two things that you're imagining is next on the agenda here that you'd really like to accomplish in the next year. Dan, you want to start?
Sure. There's an awful lot in the legislation that was passed last year that starts with the commission shall.
Yeah.
And I'm reminded, you know, that old saying of like, I know God wouldn't give me anything I can't handle, I just wish he didn't trust me so much. And sometimes I feel the same way about the legislature. But from the beginnings of clean energy plans and how we frame those out, our renewable energy framework, our energy waste reduction, and now efficient electrification through energy optimization plans, the siting of renewable energy generation, investments that in the same way that we cite a lot of other energy infrastructure, we are absolutely every single day heads down focused on doing that work. And you know, a year from now, I'm excited to come back and say that we kept faith with the spirit of the legislation, and we showed that the ambitious targets that were included and the additional work that was given to us, that we've got a pathway towards implementation that makes sense.
Yeah, that's important work, and I know you'll do it. Quentin, what's next?
Yeah, I think next year I would like two things to be said. One, is that we made it easier, we at MEDC made it easier for our sister agencies and the interested parties to understand how to engage with us. And two, making sure that we help entrepreneurs who are addressing the opportunity between climate justice and environmental justice to have greater access to capital. So hopefully to have, you know, some of those entrepreneurs be able to say that they received support or were directed in the right direction.
Great. Rachel?
Yeah, Mike, I really appreciate the 10,000-foot view that you guys are setting your sights on, which I'm, for some reason, my brain is just a little bit more detailed on this, which is, I mean, trying to take the lessons learned from other, clean energy, renewable resource installations and the related tax impacts, and thinking proactively about what is on the horizon that's going to be, coming to Michigan through utility investments and developer investments and other things, that we should already have a tax system designed to set up so that the markets that are there looking to make investment decisions already know what the lay of the land is in Michigan. And the thing off the top of my head that really jumps out is energy storage. And knowing, not knowing where that is in the technological evolution, we know it will happen at some point. And designing tax systems around these assets that are fair to, again, the communities of which they are cited, as well as, provides incentives for them to be installed, and taking those lessons learned and applying it to these new technologies as they come on board. So starting work groups, having the same stakeholder-driven process, taking our time to make sure that we've thought about all the unintended consequences and are ready to hit the ground running as soon as these investments are coming to our state.
Okay, Tim, you're batting cleanup.
All right. Well, I'll just say next year at this time, we're going to be sharing details about what our regenerative ag programming that we're standing up now is delivering, what those outcomes are, and achieving outcomes through conservation efforts in ways that we haven't seen before, right? Outcomes that are specifically aimed at climate mitigation, climate risk mitigation, models that provide opportunity to leverage historic federal investments in conservation to get additional outcomes in the way we don't see today. Models that are going to be able to deliver outcomes in Western Lake Erie Basin in ways that we haven't seen before. And we're going to have efforts well underway of how folks are engaging with this system, being a part of agriculture in different ways, having access into systems and being climate solutions on their own farms in different ways than what we've seen before.
I appreciate you guys painting such a positive future here in the next year. My ambition for the next year is to spend more time with each and every one of you, getting big things done on this and many other issues. It's a real honor to be part of this panel with you.
And Phil, maybe you and I can both get our sock game somewhere in the ballpark of Quentin's. Are those beignets?
Those are beignets.
Yeah.
That's great. Thanks, you guys. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.